It is 2026, and we are looking forward to a year of podcasting, chatting, no doubt dealing with some of the controversies that will crop up during the year, but also looking forward to many of the events that we'll be focusing on throughout the year on our coverage. And this is an interesting year because we don't have major events, but we do have some major events.
What
And
do you mean? This is full of major events.
well, there's no like Summer Olympics,
It's the
and
biggest sports event in the world this year.
I mean you've got to. I don't know. In my world, it's not major because soccer's not a huge thing in my world, but there is a World Cup in soccer and there is a Winter Olympics. So I guess
Football.
football. Yes, exactly. We're also very nice to have Sean Ingle, the chief sports writer at The Guardian, with us. And of course, Sean has been a regular on his podcast over the years and always lovely to have his insight. Purely because Sean, unlike Ross and I, who spend a lot of our time watching these things on television and looking at stuff on the internet, Sean is actually often there at the events that we would love to be at and gives us a very much a perspective that we don't have. But Sean, let's kick off with you and give us a sort of your idea of whether you would disagree or agree with me. Is this a big year in sport or is this kind of a medium year? How would you put it in terms of event sizes?
Oh, I think it's a very big year. Whenever you have a football World Cup and a Winter Olympics, plus you've got things like the enhanced games, which may or may not do anything, and all the other usual things. I think it does count as a big year. I'm looking forward to it.
So, Ross, if you say it's a big year, then what is the biggest event this year? Can you put your finger on it and say what is the biggest event?
Yeah, like it's a giant pimple on the face of 2026. It's the Football World Cup.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's June, July. I don't exactly know the dates, but the draw was done between our last podcast and now, I think. And so we more or less know who's playing where. South Africa, Mexico kick it off.
Yeah, 11th of June to the 19th of July is the actual dates.
Yeah, and I mean, I
Not bad for somebody who doesn't watch soccer much.
yes. Yeah, I mean, I'm really looking forward to it. I hope that it's not dominated and overrun by the toxic politics of the United States and Gianni Infantino,
Yeah.
which it almost certainly will because there's two absolute enormous megalomaniacs involved in the hosting of that particular event. But the last Football World Cup in 2022, I thought, remember we spoke at the time, that was one of the best sports tournaments I've ever watched.
Yes, it's one of the few. I mean, as a non-soccer loving or football, just to make sure who we're talking to, but as a non-football watching person, it was the first World Cup in football that I've actually watched with some degree of intent and really learned to appreciate. I remember we actually had a conversation about that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I agree with you. I think it is one of those events that if you're talking about people who on the wider sporting front, or even if they're not sports lovers, they're still going to watch some element of the Soccer World Cup, you'd imagine.
Yeah, time zone wise, maybe a little bit more difficult for
Yeah.
us this time than the last one, because the games. I think Sean, you may know a little bit more on this. I don't know, but they'll schedule the games with some consideration of the European market, but it'll be late night Europe, right? It's,
Yeah, indeed. I mean, it's obviously more games this time. We have 104 games up from I think 64. So that we've got obvious questions about player load. Will eventually players say too much is too much? You've got to remember a lot of these players played in the Club World Cup last summer in America in very, very hot conditions, and they've gone straight into European season. Now they're going to go straight to the World Cup. You've got all the politics involved. What if the US invades Greenland while Denmark are playing? You've got the tensions between US and Canada and Mexico. You've got the US sort of threatening not to withdraw, not to give visas to people from certain countries. I mean, one of the great things about the World Cup when you're actually there, usually, is that sense of you're just in a place and there's fans from 20, 30 different countries and they're all drinking together, having fun together. And I wonder whether that vibe might be different this time, both because of the prices of tickets, which are very, very high, and also the sort of geographical sort of vast spread,
yeah.
and also just because of the way things are in America at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not shy to say I'm not a massive football fan. Like I'll watch the big games, and the World Cup because they've added the 40 odd matches. There's no doubt that they will have diluted a lot of the first 3 weeks of it. There will be some really one-sided games that
So
are
are
not.
there more teams this year? I mean,
Yeah,
there's
yeah,
48 teams.
they've expanded it.
Okay,
Yeah.
right. Okay.
So in the past, you used to get a few boring games in the group phases that wouldn't really attract much interest, but there are more of those now. So really the interest will exponentially go up over the course of time. But I think you're right, Sean. I remember 2010, we hosted it here in South Africa, and I still look back on it with like this tremendous nostalgia. Remember what it was like here?
Yeah, it was a big hype.
The whole country was transformed by it. That won't happen in the US because it's too vast and there are too many other things happening. So that will be a shame for those people who are actually there. But I'm very much looking forward to between the four lines on the field when we get to the knockout rounds. I think it's going to be really, really good. I'm looking forward to it a lot.
Yeah, so 23rd World Cup. Hosted, of course, three nations hosting: United States, Canada, and Mexico, which is also an interesting dynamic there. I mean, Sean, do you think the traveling is going to be an issue, or or the different pools and it's based in certain sections? I don't know enough about the structure of it.
No, it will be. I mean, England are torn between having a base, say, in Kansas,
Mm.
or traveling sort of this traveling cavalcade from game to game. And I think they're probably going to stick in Kansas. But if they were to win their group, I think their quarter final would be in Mexico City. Then and you really will be going all over the place. And one of the things about Qatar, which if you were probably watching, you wouldn't have really noticed, but every game was staged within, say, an hour and a half of
Mm.
each other. And it meant that, not only could you go to a couple of games a day if you wanted to as a journalist or fan, but also teams could just base themselves in one place and without too much hassle. And that will be a factor as well, as will the heat, of course, if we get a similar temperatures to last year. So there will be various stresses and strains on the
Mm.
players and fans.
Yeah, I'd say the sports science angles will be the heat, the travel, altitude only in
I was going to
Mexico,
say
right? I
the
don't.
altitude of Mexico City.
The thing is, they'll only have like 4 or 5 matches, right? So it
Mm.
won't be a massive issue unless Denver's also got games. Then you've got two hosts with altitude. I don't know whether Denver's a host city. That's how little I've looked at it so far. That was a big issue in South Africa, incidentally, the
Mm.
altitude, you can imagine, because we had three stadiums high for sea level.
And the final was at high altitude as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Mm.
yeah, South Africa playing Mexico, probably the two teams that can deal with that the best, and other than Bolivia, maybe. But yeah, that'll be interesting. The heat is a bigger issue, I think. The players won't be adapted well to it. So it would be interesting to see how the likes of Spain, Argentina, England, and so on spend May, June trying to get the players transitioned for hot weather matches coming straight out of late autumn,
Mm.
late spring rather. Sorry, got my hemispheres mixed up. And competition, because the player load thing's the other story. I think there.
Yeah. Yeah.
No,
There'll be
absolutely.
a
I mean,
few other things. Sorry, go
I
on.
was on the player load thing. I remember doing a piece last year, and Thief Pro, which is the sort of international players union, they found that Jude Bellingham had played 30% more minutes of competitive football by his 20th birthday than Wayne Rooney at the same age. And by the time Kylian Mbappe had turned 24, he had played 48% more minutes than Thierry Henry. So there's already that load, and I don't know. I just wonder, there may be one or two players, big name stars that pull a hamstring or something or whatever, or we might find, if you remember that, you may not remember the 2002 World Cup, I think it was a bit of a damp squib because so many of the top players were either injured or tired, and it didn't make a great tournament. And I'll be really interested to see. It may be more of a squad game than ever before, not just about having the best, 11 or 15 or 16 players, but the best 22, 23, because you've got an extra game, you've got the heat and whatever else. So it'll be interesting to see how
So,
that changes.
so that's interesting because World Rugby have allowed the squad sizes for Rugby World Cups to go up over the course of the last 3 or 4 World Cups. Not necessarily one every time, but the squad sizes that were permitted were, say, too low in 2015 than they are now. And that was in part load related. It was in part concussion management related because there's a longer return to play after a concussion and so on. So they've allowed that. I don't know whether FIFA's done the same, but there would be
Last
significant pushback because there are probably 4 or 5 teams with the depth to take 26 players. And if you allow them to take 28, then you're advantaging the teams with more depth, right?
They did bump it up last time from memory from 23 to 26, and I think it's going to be 26 again this time around.
So it'd be interesting actually to do an exercise leading into it at the end of the European football season and ask once the squad lists are announced and see how many minutes each of those players have played in the last month, the last 3 months, and the last
Mm.
6 months, and then say that between your top 4 or 5 teams that could win that tournament, I think fatigue is such an important factor that the difference between those teams is small enough that the least fatigued team probably goes in with an advantage. Not quality, but fatigue.
No, absolutely. There was quite a good. I did a piece last year where I looked at the champion teams that won the Champions League, and specifically PSG and Inter and a couple of others that which they had played. They had rested some of their players or more of their players in the league games, and therefore they had a bit more. Well, if you look at say even Manchester City this weekend, they played FA Cup match, against the team in no hopers, and they still fielded a really strong side. Erling Haaland still played. And I was actually chatting to our mutual friend Stuart McMillan about this, and he was sort of, it's crazy, football and load management still are miles behind where it should be, really.
Well, they won 10-1 in that FA Cup match, so
Yeah,
they obviously did really, really need Haaland, right?
but it's just ridiculous that they could have played their third team, against Exeter,
Yeah, I know, it's mad.
and it's just mad.
So I wonder who'll be the beneficiaries. Like if you look at the sort of top five or six favorites, England, France, Spain, Argentina, Germany, does Brazil even still count? That'll be interesting. I don't know what the status of their football is. It certainly seems like they're hanging on. Um, I wonder which of those teams have got players who are in high level competitions but will have played fewer matches by virtue of not making Champions League knockouts, etc. That's the team that I would, if I was having a wager, put my money on.
No, absolutely. I mean, you would pick the big teams because of squad depth, and even if a few fall down injured, they would still have others to replace them. So it would be, I think, Spain are favourites. They play a possession game, which in the heat probably helps. England aren't far behind. Portugal might be interesting. They've got decent squad depth, and
Interestingly, on that possession data, I remember looking at this because I was trying to track in South Africa 2010 how much the altitude affected. The teams that had more possession run more.
Makes sense.
So, so that's interesting because, like, you could almost argue that the team that wants to sit back and counterattack 15 times a match might actually get away in the heat better than a team that wants to hold the ball and move it around a lot. I don't know. Let's look at that data because that'll be another consideration.
that's interesting. Although Spain did win the World Cup that year, and
True.
they were the ultimate possession team.
Yes. Though we didn't have the heat, we had the altitude factor.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Where do you think? I'm always interested in this because it applies to a lot of sports, and Sean, you'll probably have some insight here. Where does the World Cup sit on a professional footballer's CV? Like, in other words, if you're obviously being paid by your club and that's where your money's coming from, but then when you play for your country, do you still think the World Cup has the same gravitas it does in the professional era that it did 10, 15 years ago? I mean, are we talking the same? Is the desire to play for your country still there?
I think for most players, yes, not all of them. I think the World Cup, it matters more to the country as a whole. I'm speaking for I think Britain and most European countries where you do get, you might get 3, 4, 5 million, say, watching on Sky when a big soccer match is played here in the UK. But if England make the semi-finals of a World Cup, you'll have 20 million of the 70 million population watching. It will just people who don't watch the sort of soap opera that is the Premier League every week will tune and be come obsessed with the World Cup. So, but I think for players, it still matters. Obviously, it's still seen as the pinnacle, just like Olympic Games is for pretty much every athlete. Maybe a few Winter Games athletes, which we may come on to, perhaps feel a bit differently. But for most people, I think the World Cup is still the pinnacle.
I think if you look though, 2022, remember like the biggest storyline, the closer you got to the final was would Messi win a World Cup?
Mm.
And that was the storyline in 2018 also. They lost that final. No, wait, hang on. When did they lose to Germany in the final?
I think it was. I'm trying to think. Yeah, it was 2018, wasn't it? No, it was 20,
No, that was 14.
2014. Yeah, it was.
It was
Yeah, the 1-0
14.
game.
So that guillotine hanging over Messi's head, best player never to win a World Cup, was a big storyline in 14, 18, and then he got rid of it in 18. So that's 22. So I think that tells you that it means a lot in those contexts.
So, in the context of English football, for instance, I mean, England last won the World Cup probably in the mid '60s. Um, is there already talk in English media about this pressure for England to actually win a World Cup again, or is it? I mean, is it a big story? How can England win the World Cup?
There isn't at the moment, but there
There
will
will
be.
be.
It's
Yeah.
constantly in the background, and it will, yeah, come June, it will be that constant. There was a song in the mid 90s by a couple of English comedians, and it was sort of the line is sort of 30 years of hurt. Never stopped us dreaming, and now we're going to be at 60 years of hurt. So yeah, it's definitely a huge thing in the UK. This sort of sense of the country that invented the game has only ever won
We
the World Cup once.
we know the media there, like we're talking to one of you, so no offense, but we know like when England win one group game, they start singing "It's Coming Home." Eh?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Although I think that's the fans more than the media. I
Yeah.
think the
With the
media is more
media,
nuanced, but you are right. Yeah, the country.
some of them, yeah, yeah. Present
Well,
company included.
well, let's talk about our second biggest sporting event in the Winter Olympics. I'm reading up a bit about this. Ski mountaineering is going to be making its debut, one of the many sports that are participating. I looked at what ski mountaineering was, and I mean, from what I can gather, it looks very similar to what we would call cross country skiing, but you kind of go up and then you go down. That's kind of it. And then you put I think you put pads underneath the skis or some special stuff under the skis, which helps you go up the mountain. I mean, Sean, it's interesting that, I mean, when I looked up about what ski mountaineering was, it did feel like it's just a repeat of something else, but there seems to be a fair groundswell of support for ski mountaineering, particularly in places like Canada, for instance.
Yeah, indeed. I'm off to Italy in a couple of weeks' time, so I'm looking forward to seeing that. Although again, slightly sort of more British focus. We haven't got anyone good in the event, so I haven't paid a huge amount of attention to it. But I think the Winter Olympics is an event outside of the Nordic countries and one or two other countries where people aren't really focused on it, and then it arrives and it's on mainstream TV at good hours, and suddenly people become obsessed in this country with curling, in other countries, other sports, and I think it will grab the attention. And there's enough big names that people know, the Lindsey Vonns, the Michaela Schifrins, and so on. I guess the NHL stars coming back to the Olympic program for the first time since 2014. It will sort of occupy our minds over that sort of 16 days or so in Milan Cortina.
Mm.
Yeah, 116 events. Amazing to think that many events.
Like does
And
that, but that includes like the 11 in biathlon, right?
yes, yeah, and
So
it's an
there's like,
individual event,
yeah,
but it
yeah.
is it is quite widespread. I mean, even for us in South Africa, we've taken an interest in watching it because it's so foreign to us in South Africa. I think we've actually got somebody in South Africa participating in the skeleton, strangely enough, but that's the only person that's there. So there's virtually no participation in interest here, but there's a fascination element, Ross, that I think kind of brings people to it because if you love sport, the competition element is still there.
Born of the novelty,
Yeah,
because it's true. Like I watch every 4 years for 2 weeks, I become a Winter Olympic expert,
yeah.
winter sport expert. And what I like about it most, we alluded to this on our recent spotlight, is like that there's enough overlap in some of the concepts and principles when you watch cross country skiing that we see in running and cycling.
Mm.
And there's enough in understanding like the challenge in biathlon is to ski as fast as possible, but not so fast that you compromise your shooting ability, because they're two very different skills and you've got to try and trade one off against the other. So we sort of understand this and then we see it playing out and there are new people and there's a new cast of characters. It's like discovering a new series on TV every few years. So I really very much look forward to it. I will say one of the things, Sean, that I found interesting is the Winter Olympics seem to have successfully integrated extreme sport, X Games type things better than in the Summer Games. So in the Winter Games now and in the past, some of the biggest stories have been reserved for snowboarders on the half pipe doing tricks, the moguls guys. There's a ski equivalent of the pipe as well. Remember there was a young American, like 14-year-old sensation who was one of the big headline makers at a previous Winter Olympics. They seem to have done that quite well, and I think it's given the Winter Olympics an impetus that the Summer Olympics, I think, is probably still wishing it had.
No, that's a very good point. I hadn't thought of that, but I guess with the Summer Olympics, you've got established sports in there, the track and fields and swimmings and so on, which are always going to dominate by their length and their prestige. Whereas perhaps the Winter Olympics, I know ice dancing is a big thing among certain people, but perhaps because it was smaller, there was scope for other extreme sports to muscle in. And I think we all can appreciate the level of jeopardy, say if we're watching, speed skating, or if we're watching, slopestyle or snowboard cross, where you have four people bombing down, a mountain, and
Mm.
first one wins. You don't have to kind of know the intricacies of the sport to be quite excited by watching 45 seconds a minute of action where one slight half turn and you could be flying off the track, or you could be
Yeah.
shooting clear.
In which it's similar to in Paris, they debuted that slalom, that sort of paired slalom thing that they were going down, and it's got the same sensation as watching a BMX race.
That's great.
They are really engaging,
Mountain
entertaining
biking used to
sports,
have that back in the day. Downhill,
like a pairs
it
thing.
was a pairs thing in mountain biking called downhill cross, but and I never understood why they got rid of it because it was a huge amount of fun to watch.
Because Sean's right, like it's so easy to like see, okay, he's winning, and the thing is about it, you can be winning by 3 seconds, and a mistake, then you
Yeah,
lose by 20.
you in the face planting in the snow and your race is over.
Yeah, whereas when you're watching a road time trial and Evenepoel's 25 seconds up with 5Ks to go, you can go make a cup of coffee. Like, and you can come back to see the medal ceremony if you wanted to. So I really like that. The other thing I really like about the Winter Olympics is how vulnerable is the wrong word. Help me with a better word, but how susceptible it is to technological influence. Like if you go back, speed skating was massively revolutionized by clap skates. Sean, you've done a ton of stuff where you've spoken to people who work in winter sport, skeleton and luge, and the crossover to cycling is enormous because aerodynamic suits are decisive.
Completely. I mean, that was. I mean, we haven't got the time to talk about British cycling is sort of slightly dubious past. But one thing clearly was a big jump was in 2000 and before 2008 in Beijing, they discovered tech that had ridges on skin suits essentially, and they would wheel them out just for Olympics, and it gave them. I say one person I spoke to that worked on them said it wasn't a marginal gain; it was a whopping great, massive gain, and because they'd done, and effectively, it made you, in a race in an indoor environment massively better, and it was the same with in the skeleton. They the same technique, aerodynamic ridges on skin suits that really not visible to the naked eye made you much more dynamic and quicker.
Sort of like the golf ball concept. A dimpled golf ball goes further than
Yeah.
it would if it was smooth. Now, when I say I like that, I don't actually like. It's like the super shoes and running. I actually don't like it because, to some extent, what happens in the Winter Olympics in Milan is determined by investment
Mm.
and who has money and who has equipment and who has resources. So I don't like that part of it. But what I do like is the concept that you can find these performance advantages through this and so on. So that's pretty interesting. And the other one is, speaking of skeleton, it's famous as one of the case studies for like what was called a talent transfer project. I think we mentioned this before. Australia recognized that a skeleton medal was winnable. They had no culture at all for skeleton, but they said let's reverse engineer a skeleton athlete and say what we basically need is speed out of the blocks, the ability to run, pushing that little sled before you hop onto it. And they went and found sprinters and lifesavers, and they tested them for jumping ability, explosive power, and speed. And then whoever qualified started teaching them the technical elements, and they got world-class skeleton athletes in almost no time at all. As an example of talent transfer. So I like stories like that the Winter Olympics seem to throw up. Uh, Maybe not necessarily more, but I'm just more aware of them because they are novel.
Yeah.
But playing devil's advocate, I guess you could. There are lots of very talented British athletes that have learnt their skills on dry ski slopes here in the UK, and then
Mm.
and so great. But if a British athlete or British person said, "I want to take up the skeleton," there are no tracks, and yet UK
Right.
Sport investing about £6 million in skeleton. There isn't that sort of, we like to think we watch elite sport and then it encourages our kids to go and do elite sport. And that does happen in some cases, obviously, but it's almost impossible for someone, in most countries to say Australia or England to say, right, I've seen skeleton, us win a skeleton, let's go and do it because you just can't.
Yeah.
It's,
Like there's no funnel. Like
yeah, there's no
basically,
funnel and therefore we're
it's a
spending six
straw.
million quid for,
Yeah, exactly. So instead of a funnel that you'd get in many sports, in the Winter Olympics, it's a straw. One in,
Mm.
one out, not 100 in, one out. So, um, speaking of that, that is the thing with the Winter Olympics. It is so heavily dominated by the Scandinavian countries, the United States, Canada. All the more reason, I think, to put cross country running and cyclocross in. That's our
I
campaign
think
for
that
the
will,
year.
yeah, I think that will happen. And my understanding is, I know Sebastian Cohen over the party end of the UCI were sort of lobbying. They have gone quiet now because the traditional winter sports are against it. However,
Mm.
um, the organisers of the next winters in France are in favour, and I think the IOC are in favour. So I think it will happen. I think there's a
Good.
bit of tugging to and fro, but my sense is, reading between the lines, is it will happen, and I'm with you on that. I think it's great. It'd be brilliant to see more African countries at the winters. I think they are genuine winter sports. The traditional sports say, well, they're not necessarily done on snow, sure, but if you host it in the mountains in France in January or February, there will be snow, there will be ice, and you can make great TV and encourage a sort of a more diverse countries competing in the winters.
Yep.
The biggest question is whether Jamaica will be fielding a bobsled team.
They
Do
are,
we
I
know?
think.
Are
Yeah,
they?
no, I think they are. I follow one of the former hurdlers on Instagram, and he certainly they certainly are trying to qualify. So
Mhm.
I think yeah, I think let me just check that, but I think they are trying, and they may well.
Bobsled's bobsled's the other one where you get really good talent
Yeah,
from.
because
So
you need a good
remember,
sprinter out the blocks, don't
remember
you?
Lola Jones? I don't think Lola Jones ever made it to an Olympics. She sledded for the US on the World Cup circuit, but I don't think she made an Olympics. But there've been others. Greg Rutherford gave it a whack, didn't he?
Yeah, he did. Yeah, I wrote his book, and he was really keen on it, and but
He's
yeah, he
a
picked up some injuries and whatever else
he
just
was a
beforehand. But yeah, he
He's a
nearly
rower.
No, Olympic long jump champion
Oh, yeah.
2012.
Yes.
He won that long jump gold on that Super Saturday night, I think it was in London's Olympic Stadium. And then he tried to go into bobsled as well. So you get a few of these interesting athletes. The other one where you get crossovers is on speed skating to cycling, but that doesn't happen as much anymore because it's too specialized. But
Mm,
in the 80s, 90s, a lot of the speed skaters were also world-class cyclists.
mm,
So
mm.
anyway,
And I mean, just for those of us who are not watching, or well, don't know enough about the technical side of things, one of the stories I read leading up to this podcast was that there is some danger looking to the future about where these Winter Olympics can be hosted because of climate change, where there's actually a fear that there won't be enough snow. So a lot of these venues do their own snowmaking, and they say the actual snowmaking, the snow that comes from snowmaking, is actually better for participants than natural snow because it's more consistent, etc., etc. Is there any stories around this venue that indicate that there could be issues with snow, or is like snowmaking technology now so advanced that whether it's just got to remain reasonably cool for them to be able to do the sports that we expect them to do?
there was some concern in December about the lack of, because I think you do need, I think it helps when you have some natural snow and then you can dump utter, but I think there was quite a hefty dump fairly recently, so I think we are okay there. The ice hockey, there were concerns about the ice hockey venue as well, with the ice not being good enough and the stadium actually not being completely finished yet, but they did a test event recently and the ice was fine. And I think
what what makes ice not good enough? I mean, like it's just a flat surface and frozen water, no?
Well, you've had enough
I'm
GMT.
really not an expert on this, but I think
Like,
there
is
was
it
about the
the?
ice being too soft or whatever. But yeah, this
I
isn't my
wonder if
area
you
of expertise. I've stumbled into something that but yeah, there was lots
like
of talk about it.
if you. I wonder if you used salt water instead of fresh water, if the ice is faster or slower for speed skating, for instance, like stuff like that. Like you change the electrolyte concentration and change the quality of the. I don't wonder. Someone will know. Someone will tell us. I'm gonna let you know.
Excellent. Yeah, it's above my scientific knowledge, unfortunately.
By the way, Saudi Arabia 2044.
Is that the next Winter Olympic? Well,
No, but
you reckon that's going to happen?
no, I don't, I'm being facetious now. But
Uh,
like,
uh,
it wouldn't
You'd
surprise
never
me
be. I mean,
if.
Saudi Arabia building a 98-kilometer cycling tunnel now,
Yeah,
which is
and that's what
being
I'm saying.
finished. So there's a good chance they
If
might host the Winter Olympics.
if the snowmaking tech improved enough,
Yeah,
I reckon
yeah,
they'd go for it.
yeah. It will be in our lifetime.
I
Just
hope not. But
what's your? I mean, what's the event that you think stands out as the sort of number one most event most interested by your audience? In other words, if you're reporting on this, what's the event that you think most people will be interested in?
Well, I mean, for British audience, things like the big air and the slope style, because we have potential gold medalists, will be big.
Mm,
I think for an American audience, they will be watching the American speed skater Jordan Stoltz, who has a shot at the Triple Crown of the 500. And speed skating, I'm
mm,
sure you've watched, especially the short track, is really exciting. They go around in a circle, so I think that will always do well. As I said earlier, I do think that the sort of the snowboard cross, we in Britain we have a lady called Charlotte Banks who's come back from injury, but again. Um, there are very few events that are more exciting than seeing that. And again, for a journalist, I think when you are there at something that you can see everything unfolding, like the speed skating, like the tricks and flicks, that's really great. Whereas when you're watching, say, the bobsled, when you're there, you don't really see anything. You just see them at the bottom of the run, or you're in a press room. So for me, it will be at those events where I can see everything up close, because that's always you feel it's fun and you feel very privileged to be there.
That speed skater, is it short or long track? The US fella. What
It's
was
the
his name?
short track, I think.
Okay. Long track is still absolutely dominated by the Dutch, I assume. Although there was a Swede in the previous Olympics. Remember we spoke about he put his training out,
Yeah,
and we mentioned
that's
I
right.
forget his name now, Van der Poel or something. There's a Dutch sounding surname, but anyway. Um, so yeah, the short track speed skating is interesting. Remember when the Australian fella won it because everyone in front of him fell over?
I always think figure skating kind of
Yeah.
is the one element of the Winter Olympics that kind of goes away from just sport to, the granny watching in her flat is going to watch the figure skating as much as somebody else who might not be sporting orientated but will be artistically orientated. So
Hmm.
now, I don't know whether there's any huge stories in figure skating at the moment, but we always, when I think of figure skating, I think of Torvill and Dean, and back in those days when it was
Yeah,
huge sport.
there's a cultural element to figure skating
Yeah,
that is outside of sports. Helped admittedly by like the Tonya Harding
mm,
Kerrigan story and
yeah.
movies that you could watch about the dramas of how it's made, like that's the story behind the performance.
Yeah, no, you're right. Actually, Jordan Stoltz is a long skate. Sorry, that's my bad.
Ah,
I just looked up, but no, you're right. The figure skating, absolutely. I think because you have dancing on ice, and it sort of it expands wider than the actual hardcore sports fan. And in the UK, we have two skaters, Lewis Gibson and Lila Fear, who have a chance of being the first medalist since Torvill and Dean. So understandably, there's a lot of excitement there. But you're right; it does seem to attract a different audience than traditional sport.
Mm.
mm. In the spirit of correcting ourselves, Niels van der Poel is the Swedish speed skater, and he won the 5 and the 10,000 long track in the Beijing Olympics in 22. So that's who I was thinking of. But you mentioned this guy going for the Triple Crown. Is that 5, 1, and 500,
15.
1,000, and 15?
Yes.
Okay.
Mm.
Yeah, so that'll be interesting to watch. On the figure skating, there's a few interesting stories. There's an American making a comeback, and then do you remember there was an plane crash where a bunch of figure skaters in the US died? One of their figure skaters named to their team's parents died in that. So that'll be a human interest story, particularly for US watchers and listeners. So there's a couple of stories. Nothing that I'm aware of, like in the 22 games where Valieva was the big story for multiple reasons, Sean.
Yeah, no, you're right. And actually, the Russians is quite interesting. I was looking earlier. I think there's only going to be around 15 Russians and Belarusians competing. They do have a couple of figure skaters there. So including Adelia Petrosian, and she's the first skater to perform a quadruple loop in competition and the first skater to do two quadruple loops in a free skate. So she'll be worth watching. Um, but yeah, Russia clearly, have usually been a very big Winter Olympics power, but because of the Ukraine situation, they will only send a very small team over.
Here's a question that I'm digressing a little bit from the topic, but when do you think Russia will be allowed as a country to be back in major sport? Because it feels like this is a never-ending story, but there must become a point when they will be allowed or they will be back in world sport, because it's they can't do it forever. I mean, I actually don't know what the status of Russia is in terms of its global acceptance.
What complicates things when it comes to the Olympics is that Russia has it's taken over a bit of Ukraine, and that means the sort of
Mm,
you're not supposed to do that. And when it comes to, it's not about the invasion as such, because obviously countries invade each other all the time. It's more the fact that the Olympic Committee aren't neutral, if that makes sense. So they've
mm,
invaded part of that area where, anyway, it's disputed, and therefore that the Olympic Committee isn't authorised. So once that's there, then the Russians would have a much better chance. So it's not just about invasion. Otherwise, I mean, if US invaded Greenland, for instance, that would upset a lot of people, but it would be they wouldn't have US wouldn't take over the functioning of some of the Olympic Committee of Greenland, if that makes sense to you.
Mm.
So
So
that's where
it's so it's not just a doping issue. Is that what you're suggesting? That
yeah, no,
if
I think with
it's a
athletics,
political
that's been
issue.
one of the things. But I think with the Russians, it's not just the invasion; it's the fact that there's this disputed area where the IOC have sort of said, well, you're not allowed to sort of do this because it violates the Olympic Charter.
Mm.
Yeah.
Uh, one other thing, I mean, cross-country skiing is like the endurance sport, so it's in our wheelhouse.
Mhm.
Would be remiss of me not to say that one of the stars of the games is likely to be a Norwegian cross-country skier, a guy called Johannes Klæbo, who won in 2022, but in the 2025 World Championships won gold in all six of the events.
Hmm.
So there were six, and he's gold in all of them. So that's freestyle sprint, 20K skiathlon, 10K individual start classic, 50K mass start, classic team sprint, and the relay. So we know Norway's good, but this guy, and I remember watching him in 2022, and I've subsequently watched a couple of his events leading up to Milan. He's unbelievable. Like he's
Oh.
really, really good. And I mentioned that
Like to
because
see his VO2 max and his power
yeah, like
numbers.
some of the physiological data on these guys must be mind blowing. You know, the
Yeah.
highest in the world, right? Because you get arm and leg involvement. And so anyway, Lily is a discourse member, and she, when we did our awards show, she said you missed him. He should have been the Sportsman of the Year. And it's like, yeah, of course I missed him because we don't watch
You
any
don't
of
watch
it.
enough of it.
But he's
Yeah.
gonna have he'll have his moment in the spotlight in Milan for sure. He's unreal. Like it's so good to watch.
Yeah. Sure. Now, obviously, you know about this guy. I mean, he sounds like he's he might be the super athlete of the Winter Olympics.
He is, and I haven't covered much of that discipline, but when I have done, because we have one Brit that's not bad, it's amazing just how many people are there, Norwegians, just wanting to sort of speak to him. He's a proper superstar in the country alongside the Haalands and Inge and the Magnus Carlsens of the world. He really, really is up there. And for the last two Winter Olympics, Norway have topped the medal table. And he's been one of the reasons why.
Mm.
Okay. Now, the third biggest event, controversially, I'm going to say it, the Commonwealth Games takes place this year.
Well, it's big for other reasons.
Well, I mean,
Yeah.
there are going to be something like 3,000 athletes, 74 nations, and we know that the actual venue of the Commonwealth Games this year was moved from Australia, from Victoria to Glasgow. So this is where, Sean, we're going to bring you in here. But it's it still manages to maintain itself and survive. And we've often talked about on this podcast how long can the Commonwealth Games survive, because it feels like it's a bit of a non-event in the world scheme of things. But where do you think it sits in terms of interest in the UK, and can it last another two Commonwealth Games, or are we potentially seeing the end of the Commonwealth Games in the next 10, 20 years?
Um, a good question. I think it's certainly obviously a pretty small event, and it's a dwindling event. I think it'd be wrong to say otherwise. We're only got it's sort of a slimmed down Commonwealth Games this time. There are only 10 events, because it was essentially given the
Mm.
kiss of life by Glasgow. But that said, in 4 years' time it will be staged in India, and India will throw quite a lot at it. They want to convince the IOC and other sports federations they can host and organize multi events successfully. So it's sort of, and when you speak to people at the Commonwealth Games, it was the federation, they say, yeah, we have people interested in 2034. So who knows? It sort of staggers on. I keep thinking it surely will go, but no, on it continues.
Be interesting to survey and ask like the Commonwealth countries who also do well in the Olympics. So now with obviously Great Britain, not that you compete not as Great Britain in the Commonwealth, but you know what I mean. Let's call it the collection of those nations. Jamaica would be among those. Australia, obviously New Zealand. I suppose even South Africa, a few other African countries, Kenya. Like their perception of the Commonwealth Games has to have evolved and changed. They're now using it as a development opportunity.
Mm.
They're saying that we can send a 21-year-old, it'll be their first multi-sport Olympics where they stay in a village at 21 with a view that when they're 23 and 27, they're going to win us Olympic medals. Because I remember someone did an analysis where they said, what proportion of the world's top 10 go to the Olympics and the Commonwealths? And in the Olympics, it's 9.5. Occasionally one of them misses it for injury or selection reasons or something. In the Commonwealth Games, it's like two.
Mm.
So it's clearly weakened, but it still has a different place in the development pathways for some of those bigger countries. And that's probably the thing I think that keeps it alive.
Mm. And to some extent, as Sean's mentioned, they brought it down now to 10 sports, 7 down from the previous ones, which maybe means that the costs of hosting it are lower, because you don't have as many venues to worry about.
Yeah.
And also, potentially, if you look at it and you can reduce the costs and make it more economically viable, it becomes that feeder event for those young athletes. So maybe that's where its place is down the line,
Yeah.
as a sort of
Yeah, for sure.
a mini Olympics.
Are any of those 10 events esports? Because they were on the front foot, weren't they, Sean? There was a time when Commonwealth was saying really imminently, we're going to introduce esports to these games. That didn't happen?
No, it didn't happen, and it's interesting. The IOC have sort of moved away as well from esports because they were going to do a thing and Saudis and Kirsty Coventry has sort of pushed that down. So that's sort of
Hmm.
fallen off the agenda. I mean, the other thing worth pointing out with the Commonwealth Games in the UK is it's always normally been shown on our main broadcast of the BBC. This time around, it's going to be shown on satellite TV on TNT, and I suspect that will mean it will be much more out of sight, out of mind. But we
Yeah,
shall see.
and that has so many knock-on effects because then when you go to market for sponsorships in the future and you say how many people watched it, you say, well, 25% of what it used to be. I could watch it thanks to my £32 a month rip-off with TNT, so I might watch the Commonwealth Games. Um, well, I was going to ask you one other thing there, Sean, is as a bit of trivia, are there any sports in the Commonwealth that are not in the Olympics?
Well, here's the
Uh,
list of sports. Isn't
Yeah,
it? Athletic,
because I was going to
Netball,
netball,
guess the two. The netball was
judo.
one, and the other one
I
was
know
bowls.
judo's in there.
The other one's bowls. Is bowls
yes,
still in the Commonwealth?
it is.
Yes.
Yeah, it's one of the 10.
Okay, so
Yeah, I
yeah,
think that is it.
Basketball, three
it's in
by
the,
three, 3x3 basketball,
that's in the Olympics.
3x3
Yeah,
is it? Okay.
both that and the normal one, which is weird. They should have chosen one, but anyway,
Mhm.
yeah. Is that it?
That
Yeah,
is it.
so
Yeah.
so I'm going to give you a list of sports: athletics and para athletics, swimming and para swimming, track cycling and para track cycling, netball, weightlifting, and powerlifting, boxing, judo, bowls, para bowls, the 3x3 basketball and 3x3 wheelchair basketball. Those are the sports.
Okay, so yeah, it's
Yeah,
the two unique ones.
yeah. So yeah, and then we used to have squash back in the day and all that sort of thing, which was quite fun. Cricket was a big part of it. I remember following the games in 1998 and watching the
Didn't they
cricket
play it as
selects.
six aside?
Uh, maybe, but I remember I think South Africa were in the final in
Yeah, I
1998. I
vaguely
back in the
remember that.
day, yeah.
Rugby sevens used to be in the Commonwealth, and then when they got into the Olympics, they said we'll go with a World Cup and a Olympics. No thanks to the
Mm,
Commonwealths anymore.
yeah,
So
yeah, but no road cycling, just all track stuff, which I guess also reduces costs.
resources.
Yeah,
Mm.
and reduces costs.
When are those? Sorry, is that
The Commonwealth Games 23rd of July to the 2nd of August, so right in the
so we'll
middle of
go
the
from World Cup football straight into Commonwealth? No withdrawal symptoms for us.
No, we don't have to, and we've
And
got a
then we
bit of
have
a
a European Athletics Champs, which is, we'll have some good races. Inge Britson is going to be there, and and so's Josh Kerr and Jake Whiteman. There'll be some good competition there, and that'll be in Birmingham, in the UK as well.
Speaking of athletics prediction, Ingebrigtsen gets the world record in the 1500 and the 5000 this year. That was my prediction last year, and I was wrong. But I'd like to think myself as just late, not wrong, or early in my case. What do you reckon, Sean? I know you've got maybe some insight. Is he going to go for it? Like, is there
Uh,
an appetite to try and get these world records?
yeah, yeah. Well, I spoke to him last week, and there'll be a piece in the Guardian in a week's time. So without giving too much away, he did have his tonsils removed in November, so he's sort of building up, and he's not going to race till June probably in the Bislett Games. But he says he wants to have one crack at the 5, the 15, and the 3, like one serious crack. And I think it does help this year that there isn't
Yeah,
a world champs or an Olympics to go for.
yeah.
Uh,
This is the year.
this
I
is the
think so.
year, yeah.
I also think the other world record that will go this year is the marathon, men.
really
Yeah, Sarway
subway.
will break that in Berlin. I think if he gets good weather, I think he would have broken it in 25 if he'd had decent weather.
He won London last year, didn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, and then he won Berlin on too hot a day to do justice to I think what he's capable of. The other guy is the world cross country champion, Kip Limo, who won in Chicago in an incredibly fast time. So it'll be interesting if Berlin gets both of them. London almost certainly will because London does that. They get Berlin. Sometimes they go for one and they say, let's just make this a pure paced world record attempt. But I reckon Sawe breaks the world record. I don't think under 2 hours. This is prediction time. He'll go 15 seconds faster. So we got to wait another year for a sub 2, but I think the world record will go.
I spoke to Sawe and his agent in Monaco in December, and they were they were convinced he was going to do it. They don't think he would have gone under 2 hours either, but they were convinced he was going to do it. All his form suggested
Mm,
he would, and it was quite interesting that they got his sponsors Adidas got in touch with the Athletics Integrity Unit and said to them, "Look, we will pay for you to test him as
mm,
much as possible." Because after with Chepnogich and so on, we want this record to be seen as clean. So he did. He was tested sort of every I think 2 or 3 days, sometimes twice a day.
Hmm.
And speaking to the RU, well, you know all this obviously because you spoke to Brett as well. It was
mm.
interesting, and that's quite an interesting development, I think. And I wonder whether maybe other athletes will go down that route in the future.
Indeed. Actually, for listeners, if you missed our second to last pod of 2025, it's an interview with Brett Clothier of the AIU. And we asked him whether Sarway has expressed an interest in doing the same thing again. And he said likely he would, but it wouldn't be as intensive over as short a period. They might say, because it's obviously costly, they were doing the most sophisticated methods you can to look for artificial testosterone and that sort of stuff, which is not your routine anti-doping. And so instead of doing it over a period of, say, I think it was 4 weeks ahead of that Berlin Marathon, they're talking about 2 or 3 months and then slightly lower density of testing, but still the principle is there. And I
I think it
also
was longer. I
wonder,
think it was longer than that, but you are right. They would do it. They would do it.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
it's
Less.
an interesting one. I mean, have you when that was announced and you wrote a story on it, what was it met with? Because to me, it was the most positive, proactive step I think I've seen an athlete take in anticipation of their credibility, their performances. Did other athletes perceive it that way? And is there a general feeling that we should also do this? Not general, but even two other athletes who's saying, "Ah, that's not a bad idea."
I've not spoken to many others about it. I think the issue would be cost.
Yeah.
Um, I think a lot of national anti-doping agencies t just test urine, and really, unless you're very stupid, it's probably not going to tell you very much. And if you are doing the full analysis, you are looking at several $1,000s or pounds per test. So that will be issue. And um, you would need a sponsor like Adidas to sort of come in to do it more often.
I wonder what the financial
But
trade-off is.
Adidas are obviously paying for the Solway tests, I
They
imagine.
did, yeah. His
Yeah,
sponsor
yeah.
stood in and said, so they've obviously said,
Mm.
right, we think you'll break this world record. And that's good for us
Mm.
because our shoe is going to be on a poster with your face on it, world record holder, Sebastian Solway. Because that's why they pay them the bonuses. They know that it's good. And if they're going to pay a guy $250,000 as a bonus for breaking the world record, I wonder what they say is like, you know what, we pay you 300, but 50 of it is going to go into testing because then that world record is more meaningful than it would be if you were Chep and Gedich and no
Yeah.
one believes you. Then all of a sudden, in Chep and Gedich's case, I reckon the world record was bad publicity for somebody because no one believed it at the time.
Mm. Yeah.
Anyway, that was just I wanted to make those three predictions. What else is happening in athletics this year? We've got the Ultimate Championships of the Universe Athletic. I don't know what it's called. It's called something like that. Ultimate
Yeah, it's
Athletics.
the Athletics
Yes.
Ultimate Championships, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's a 3-day event in Budapest.
Yeah, I think that World Athletics thinking is that people, the average fan will, well, the hardcore fan will follow the Diamond League. They'll follow all the events, but perhaps the average fan won't. And this idea of a sort of an end of season thing with a bit more razzmatazz, they're going to let athletes do more with. They're going to bring it, allow them to sort of film themselves and do. I think try and explore things to bring the action a little bit different. When I spoke to John Ridgen, I said, well, why aren't you using drones more to sort of, perhaps with the pole vault to sort of capture just when Mondo goes over 6 meters, what it looks like. And he said, well, we do need to experiment more. So you may see World Athletics using this as a sort of a test bed for content and things that then the wider world sees at the World Champs in 27 Olympics in 2028. But I think it's part they're doing this because otherwise it would be almost a dead year in terms of a championship, and they want to sort of keep the momentum going, I think.
Mm.
So what? It's the top 10, is it? Or how does it
Well,
work again?
it's a
Depends on
convoluted
the
Kind of
qualifying
qualified.
system
Yeah.
where, if you're an Olympic champion, you're in, you're the world champion, you're in, you're the Diamond League winner, you're in, plus etc. etc. So I mean, essentially, they're trying to hype it up as the best against the best, but that would happen anyway.
Mm.
A Diamond League final if everyone actually showed up. So anyway, you know.
So, and it's in Budapest. You were in Budapest for the Worlds 2 years ago. Do you fancy a trip back?
I'd love to go back, but I need to take my cooling fan with me.
Because you've got to, we
Yes,
got it.
Sean will know how hot it is in Budapest.
But it'll be later than the Worlds were,
Yeah,
right?
it
Because
would
it'll
be.
be the close of the season, so that'll at
Yeah.
least hopefully spare the athletes some
Yeah.
issues.
And also, you got great crowds there because probably the one thing they took out from the World Championships in Budapest was the support of the locals. I mean, it's insane, the passion for track and field.
I dare say that's why they went back there for this, no?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, Hungary wants the 2036 Olympics.
So,
And it's not a bad thing to sort of show that you're investing in elite sport, and it will use around that event. I'm sure there'll be people there that IOC members and whatever, and they will be wined and dined.
yeah. The one topic and event which I find quite fascinating for us in South Africa, we don't see much of it, but we see the passion behind it, is the World Snooker Championships on the 18th of April to the 4th of May. And you see the vibe around this on television. I mean, just for you in the UK, we know it's a huge sport over there. Tell people who know nothing about snooker competition, sorry, not snooker, World Snooker Championships, how big it is in the UK. Like, is it something that is really like watched by millions of people, or is it still fairly niched? Like darts, for instance.
I think darts has overtaken it, and actually there were some snooker players talking this week. There's a big event going on, and they were talking about how they feel darts has overtaken it because snooker's a strange thing, because in the mid 80s there wasn't much sport showing on British TV. And when Steve Davis, who was this legendary sort of snooker player, was beaten by a Northern Irish guy called Dennis Taylor, I think 18 million people were still watching at 1 a.m. So it does have this sort of, people still talk about that, and that there's a star called Ronnie O'Sullivan that does well. But actually, I think snooker is one of those sports where it is on the decline, and people do watch the world champs. And in China it's growing, but generally there's that sort of sense of fin de cycle. It's sort of end of the season. It's not as big as it was. Whereas darts is something that really has sort of blown up.
Is the World Champs the one that takes place at the Crucible? Because
Yes, indeed.
Okay.
It's a very small venue. I've been there a few times, and yeah, it's only a couple of thousand odd people, I think. Will be in there, but
I thought it was now. Like I always associated with it like a start of the year January thing, but maybe I'm mixing it with darts.
Yeah,
which is
18th of
different.
April is the
Huh.
time. I mean, it is fascinating because they're pub sports essentially. And I mean, darts again, I always find darts quite fascinating to watch because the technology that they've got on darts, for instance, is quite amazing because you've got the camera facing the dartboard, then you've got the crowd behind, all of them who are logged up, and it's raucous. Great
The
fun
problem
to
is like if
watch.
you watch the snooker, like it's got so
Not
many.
quite the same in snooker.
No, but it's a polar opposite, right? Because
Yeah,
you have to be quiet and there's sort of polite applause and so on. So like the reason they're falling behind is because in darts you can go as a rubber duck or you can go as Borat, dress up in a mankini, and it's like I don't think it almost doesn't matter what you did. You're giving people a chance to behave the way they want to behave. In snooker, you're constraining them from doing it. How can it possibly keep up?
Yeah.
It's a dilemma, actually. Speaking of sevens, I think rugby sevens suffered for the same reason, is that they didn't know whether it'd be a serious sports event or a party.
Mm.
And they tried to be both. And then they ended up killing the party. And then it died. Or it didn't die, but it declined.
Declined, yeah.
And I think it's the same for darts. Darts, meanwhile, has embraced that. Like it says, let's go.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Do you know right now the World Bandy Championships is taking place as well?
is that on my 32
That's on
pounds
the
a month?
12 to 18th of January is the time of the. I mean, Nick, Sean, do you know what bandy is?
I'm completely ignorant. So, but
So bandy is a kind of ice hockey but with a ball. So it's kind of field hockey mixes with football versus.
But not on ice.
So you play it on ice. You play it on like you would on an ice rink.
So
and
you
then
skate,
you're skating.
and instead of a puck, there's
Instead
a
of a
ball.
puck, you got a ball, and you're not allowed to physically harm each other. So
You have a
basically,
stick.
and you have a stick, but a straight stick as opposed to a bent stick, which is important apparently. But also you're not allowed to physically get engaged with each other. So it's a much more polite version of ice hockey, I kind of feel. But I don't think there's a huge amount of television coverage of the World Bandy
You don't
Championships right now.
think?
Then, but I reckon you can watch some highlights on YouTube.
I'll have a look, maybe.
Sean, just looking at the year for you, what sort of sticks out as other than what we've spoken about, what sticks out as your highlights for the year?
Well, I wouldn't call this a highlight, more a low light, but it's probably we should reference the enhanced games in Las Vegas
Yeah.
in May. We got James Magnussen, the Aussie 100-meter freestyle world champion or former one, will be going for $1 million if he breaks quotes and quotes the world record. I think the British swimmer Ben Proud will be in that event. You've got Fred Curley, the former sprinter. I don't think any of these guys probably will break the world record. I mean, I guess there has been talk in track and field of, especially fast tracks where you could sort of change things. I guess you could maybe put a slope downhill a bit to sort of claim. I don't know how, but I think for Curly to sort of, I think what's his PB 977, 978, something like that. For him to then drop a couple of tenths of seconds, I can't see it, and I certainly can't see Reece Prescott, who is Britain's fifth fastest sprinter, who's run 993. I can't see him getting anywhere close, no matter how much drugs. Although he claims
Oh,
he,
but especially because he's pinky sworn that he's not going to use any. Did you see that, Mike? He
Yeah.
says he's
yeah,
not going to.
What's he going to do though?
He just run au natural, paniagua, bread
But
water,
what's the point of him going there if he's just going to run?
a bigger. So this is where it's interesting, and we covered this on the or mentioned it. Is he's saying that there's better earning potential for a clean athlete in the enhanced games than in the non.
So if he wins the enhanced games as a clean athlete,
Yeah, and maybe there's an appearance fee that he
maybe a
reckons
conundrum.
he's because he's the fifth fastest in Britain.
Mm.
He's probably getting one or two Diamond League invites a year. Maybe the appearance fee invitation money from this one night is worth as money as five or six normal ones. I don't know. I don't know what the
but
economics of it are.
he'd retired last year, so I think, and he was talking about working, get up at 5 a.m. to sort of do a dead end job. Um, and I think it was quite interesting is we are only 5 months away and there haven't really been many big names announced still. I mean, this isn't really about sport, it's about selling anti-aging
Yeah,
products.
exactly.
But
Yeah.
actually, if you do, it's again, say if Fred Curley is doped up to the gills and you've got Prescott running, even if he doesn't break the world record, but he wins by a fair way, it will still look good. You can't have nobody racing Curley. You need other people in the race. So
Mm.
they might be paying, I don't know what they're paying. They might be giving 20, 30, 40, $50,000. And Prescott thinks, well, you know what? That's what might make a year in a dead
Exactly.
end job. Why not
Yeah.
just rock up?
So they do have a third guy, right? Because Marvin Bracey, who got suspended by the AIU late last year, and also in that same World Champs where Curly won a medal, Bracey did. I get
It
confused
was
whether
in
he won
Eugene, yeah.
because Coleman won that, and then Curly and Bracey were second and third. I just can't remember the order. So that they'll have three sub 10 guys in that race, and I'm thinking always about like from the sports science podcast perspective, what would be more interesting if they run 9.5 or if they run slower than they used to run without allegedly using drugs, which is the more interesting thing
What's
to
your
explain.
prediction? And do you think they actually will be quicker? Will Fred Curley be doing PBs?
No, I don't think
I
so.
don't think so.
I don't think so. Especially because it's one off, like
Mm.
so there's a bit of day-to-day variability that might cost you a little bit of time and so on. But I don't expect that they'll be that much faster. And then it'll be interesting to say, well, what does that mean?
Mm.
Because these guys, they come into it under a cloud. They're both serving doping bans. Okay, admittedly for whereabouts failures, and it's not like they've been caught glowing, but they don't exactly have goodwill, and they're not as fast as they were when they did. So, so there's some funny jokes I think that'll maybe come out of it. I don't know. And similarly for Magnussen, I don't think he's at the level anymore to break a world record 5 years after his physiological peak. But who knows? Maybe they will. Will you go to Vegas for it, Sean?
Uh, I don't know is the honest answer. If they want me to, I will. But yeah, that's not on my current schedule at the moment. But I wouldn't be surprised if we didn't send someone. It's whether it's someone from our US office or London.
And then the other thing is and I don't know whether they're going to do this in the name of supporting their ultimate objective, which, as Sean said, is selling anti-aging drugs to the general population. That's no doubt. This is just a Trojan horse. Are they going to document what drugs were used? Like, is Curly, Bracey, Magnuson going to explain this was my doping regime for the 6 months leading up to the event, and I used this testosterone growth hormone, EPO. These were the dosages. This is how I used them. Are they going to do that or no?
I don't know, but I think it would make sense for them to do so if you're trying to sort of sell these products and and you can sort of say, this is what I did. You could it would make sense, wouldn't it, of some sorts
Mm.
to claim at least these are the three things that made me bigger, stronger, faster. Yeah, I
I,
don't.
the bigger issue is like I don't think anything they do is trustworthy. So like when Sean jokes about a downhill track, I would make a downhill in 96 meters long. Who's measuring it?
Yeah.
Like they don't care.
Well, are they building a bespoke venue? So do we know that they can manipulate things like that?
Again, this
I
is
don't
not.
know. We don't,
You would
I
think
don't
though
know.
it would people would mock it if it was seen to be. Yeah,
But
but
the
then
thing
you're
is,
right
it's
though. If you're a top official or a track measurer or whatever, you're not going to want to be associated with it unless they give you
yeah,
an incredible amount of money. So
like they're making their own rules. Like that's the
yeah.
point. Like they've just decided what's going to be allowed and what's
Mm.
not. So why would you bother with certification and validation of your equipment?
You're
It's
saying
like
the pool might be shorter as well.
that's what I'd do. That's what I'd do. If my business
How
relied,
do you say? I mean, it's swimming, track and field, and weightlifting.
they've
So
got a
those are the
power
three
lift
events.
to try and break the
Powerlifting, you can't really change that unless you put the wrong
just label the weights wrong.
label the weights wrong.
How cynical are we? I don't know. It'll be interesting to see what the cultural reaction to it and so on is. The philosophical reaction. I heard an interview on one of our local radio stations between Christmas and New Year where they were talking about it, and the guy they were interviewing was what they called a futurist, not a sports person. So he's talking about something he's not necessarily. And he was trotting out all the usual arguments is that everyone in the Olympics is enhanced because they train, they eat differently, they use specialized equipment, etc. So this is no different. So that's the one philosophical argument that will be rolled out. The other arguments around harm, and then you're going to get like, and we mentioned Ashenden, Michael Ashenden, the anti-doping guy, scientist for many years, wrote a piece which we missed at the time, but covered the other day, talking about how he now backs the enhanced games as well for all those reasons. So I think it'll cause quite a lot of debate and argument and so on. But I hope very little comes of it and it disappears. But 2026, I hope is the last we hear of this.
Yeah, yeah. Anything else, Sean? I mean, that sticks out. I know that. I mean, there literally are hundreds of events out there and things we can talk about for hours here. But anything else that sort of stands out in terms of what your highlights are?
I mean, not really. I mean, it will just be that sort of the usual, cavalcade of, you know,
Mm,
of Grand Slams in tennis. I mean,
mm,
will anyone break the duopoly of Sinner and Alcaraz?
mm.
Probably not. I think the women's game's quite interesting at the moment as well. Golf, you've got that ongoing thing with Liv and the USPGA and Brooks Koepka coming back to the PGA Tour. So there will be plenty to go at, but in terms of unique things for 2026, I think we've covered them pretty well.
Yeah.
Um, Hot take on tennis. Sinner wins the Grand Slam this year.
Aha.
That's
Okay.
my
So prediction.
yeah.
So Alcaraz gets
Four finals.
demoted.
Four,
Four finals, but loses every one.
Yeah, that's. I mean, it's a
Alcaraz.
hot take for a reason. But I do think that if Sinner is at his very best, he is unplayably good. People will say the same about Alcaraz. But the thing last year that I think Sinner didn't have between Australia and France, he didn't have any tournaments because of that doping quote unquote ban rest period. In the absence of that, I reckon he's good enough to win all four. So that's my hot take.
Do you think
Um,
Sabalenka could be the women's dominant player this year?
no, the women's game's not as predictable.
Mm.
I think she will be the dominant player,
'Cause
but
there
I
were
don't
four
think
different
she.
Grand Slams winners last year, weren't there? Yeah,
Yeah,
in women's
they were.
tennis. Yeah.
And I would expect there to be two or three this year because I
Mm,
don't think one player can win all of them.
mm,
It's
mm.
just more open because of the lack of the first serve. Will we see more gimmicky type things in 2026, like Paul fighting Anthony Joshua, like Noah Lyles racing against Show Speed, like take your pick, Sabalenka Kyrgios? Actually, that's what reminded me of it. You reckon that sort of thing is something sports are pursuing, or are they like just
No, I think it's inevitable we'll have more of that because we know it works. Netflix knows it works. people with with money know it works. So I think yes, inevitably there'll be more of that stuff. I don't know what it'll be, but I
Mm.
mean, enhanced games is sort of a version of
Yeah, that's true.
that. So yeah,
True.
we'll get more of it, more of that nonsense. Um, yeah, inevitable.
One other headline making sports story that is almost certainly going to happen. In fact, I'm as certain as I can be without being positive, is that the IOC will change the transgender policy and finally draw a boundary around women's sports.
Mm.
The specifics of that, I don't know, but I'm very, very sure that in the next 6 months, you may know more about IOC calendars, Sean, but like they'll wait for a moment when they're all together. They don't want to undermine their Winter Olympics, but I think it's imminent that they are going to say that biological sex determines eligibility, which is long, long, long overdue. What remains to be seen is where they put the specifics. Like, will they test for it, or will they rely on team doctors to identify non-eligible cases? And what do they do with DSD cases like Castor Semenya? Do they treat those as male, which I think they should do,
Mhm.
or do they try and like create some loopholes for that subset of athletes? I don't know how they'll go about that. So the detail will be interesting, but I'm pretty certain that it's coming.
Yeah.
On that, I think DSD, I think will be included in any ban. Is
Yeah.
my from people I speak to, and I think it may even be announced quicker than we think. I think in the IOC at the moment, there's a sort of a discussion of whether it could be announced sort of very, very soon or
Mm,
after the winters. But I
yeah.
think you're all right.
There's a few others there. Like, I mean, it's a topic we've covered a lot and it gets a lot of reaction and it's an important one, obviously. But we'll wait now for the big things. The other big thing that's happening literally right now is the Supreme Court is hearing a case. I don't know if you've seen any of that in the news, but basically they are now making hearing and the whole last towards the end of last year, a whole bunch of briefs were submitted to the Supreme Court. They've been in front of those judges in the last few days arguing for and against. Um, so they will make a decision in the next few days. The problem there is that, like other things in the US, it is so politicized. Like literally the first sentence in the, because you can listen to the audio transcripts of this, and I've heard a few. The first sentence offered by the lawyer representing the trans athlete case is, in recent times, conservatives have argued that. So like, so straight away, it goes into like, you're a conservative, you're a Democrat, you're a Republican, you're red, you're blue, and no other reasonable debate can happen. So even when, and I'm saying when because I'm pretty certain it'll go this way, the Supreme Court will rule in favor that the states can protect women's sport. So the states will be told by the Supreme Court that it is at your discretion to disqualify males from participating in women's and girls' sports. Even then, it won't change much in the US because they'll just double down on their political position. That's the problem right now. But the IOC's announcement, I think, will move the needle because then every federation, every sport, every union around the world will say, well, hang on, the IOC, the blanket, the governing body, the umbrella body has said we should do this. Let's finally go and do this.
Yeah. Yeah. As you say, it's about time it kind of happened.
Yeah, 100%.
And probably, boxing's the one sport which will probably amateur boxing will benefit, I guess, the most from this,
well,
really, given the controversies of the past.
yeah, well, World Boxing already last year announced a policy, not a particularly well formulated one, I didn't think, in terms of like detail, but the policy was good that they were going with sex at birth. And I think it was them, athletics, cycling, swimming, rugby, that have eventually pushed the IOC into realizing, and plus Coventry taking over, like we've got to actually fix this. And I know a lot of people, like women in particular, who are so angry and upset with the IOC over how passive and dishonest and cowardly they've been that they want there to be some retribution. But like the people who have led the IOC to this position now, where it's only 2026 that this is going to happen, those people should have no involvement in sport in the
Mm.
future, in my opinion. If I was in, I'd say, like, you're done. You got to pay for like the fact that you've harmed women for 10, 20 years.
Mm.
So anyway, that's, let me not go on a rant on this now.
Just leading on from that, I'm interested to hear both your thoughts on this. I always think if you look at this year, women's sport as a collective has in the last couple of years really kind of come to the fore. I mean, I think the Tour de France for women I always think is the first event that really kind of made women's sport into the main limelight. I'm seeing this year we've also got the first test match being played at Lords between England and India, which is the first time a women's test match is taking place for women there. We've also got Champions League Cup for women, all that type of thing. Ross, I mean, your view of it, women's sport is going to become more and more important and much more mainstream?
Yeah, and I remember the Rugby World Cup broke every record: ticket
Yeah.
sales, viewership, general interest. The Cricket World Cup, I think we mentioned like the World Cup that was won in India last year by India. They beat Australia. No, actually, did we beat Australia? Anyway,
Mm,
we made the
yeah.
final against them. I think we might have eliminated the Aussies. Um, the prize money there was enormous. Like, so the financial investment in women's sports gone up. I think all these sports have recognized that you can't continue to sell to only 50% of the world.
Mm.
So, like, you're positioning your product and you're alienating so many people. So, the growth opportunities in women's sport are massive. And so they'll capitalize on that because they've got a business incentive. They're not in this for the good of humankind. They've got a
Yeah.
business incentive. And they realized, I think, that there's so much interest and growth and potential in women's sport. And that's what I think has changed the attitude from many of the sports.
Sean, would you agree with that? I mean, see, the Women's T20 World Cup takes place in England and Wales this year. That's in June. I mean, I always think the economics are interesting because does it really make financial sense for these events to happen? You have to have them in this modern world. And obviously there was interest in the sport, but I still think economically it must be a challenge.
It is, yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I do generally agree, and obviously it's a great thing. One note of caution. I know the TV viewing figures for the Women's Super League here in the UK did go down or have gone down this season. I mean, there is only so much time and arable attention that we can give to anything, whether it's Netflix, whether it's sport, whatever else. And I think, women's sports, because in many cases they have, through historical reasons, oppressive reasons, wherever they are, come from behind they've built an amazing momentum, but it's still hard in many cases to sort of, away from the World Cups and the big major events, to sort of sustain or grow rather an ecosystem all the time in every sport. So that's the one note of caution I would have. Um,
Yeah. Yeah,
the
I
other thing
think
I would
that's
say,
right. Yeah.
sorry,
No, go on, go on.
no, no, no. I was just going to say, tangentially, I did look, and Yannick Sinner to win all four Grand Slams is 10-1. So if you do fancy that bet, the
What's
bookies.
Alcaraz? Do the bookies reckon Alcaraz is more likely than Sinner
No,
or no?
he'd be less likely, because Sinner's the favourite for the Slam, so Alcaraz would be more to win a Grand
Uh,
Slam. But yeah,
the thing that's interesting about Alcaraz, which on tangentially now, is that he's left his coach. If you saw that, like it happened
Mm.
over the December period, like they didn't renew the deal that he had with Juan Carlos Ferrero. And a lot of people at the time were like, whoa, this is big because Ferrero was the person who gave a bit of ballast to Alcaraz's personality because they were polar opposites. And so it's going to be interesting to see whether, because in tennis, it seems to me, it's interesting. The coach does make quite a big difference. Like you look at Djokovic and how many coaches he went through, and sometimes they were good, sometimes not so good. So I don't know. It'll be interesting to see how Alcaraz goes without that influence.
Mm.
Um, just getting back to the women's sport, I don't know. It would be really interesting. Like, did the Women's Rugby World Cup break even from the perspective of the cost to put that event on relative to the sponsorships that were attracted and the ticket sales and the hospitality and so on? I suspect not yet.
Mm.
So all these sports, the Cricket World Cup almost certainly wouldn't have.
Yeah.
Um, Euros football and Women's World Cup football, that might, because I think the viewership and the interest is much bigger for football than other sports. The Women's Tour de France, I don't know. Does that stand alone as a commercially viable product yet? I don't know.
Yeah.
Or cycling saying we actually have to prop this up and run it at a loss because in 10 years' time it's going to break even. Maybe 2 years' time, who knows? Those economics would be quite interesting because that's the dilemma all these sports have to take is because I think Sean's right. Like the person who watches the Premiership in England is probably not also got the time to watch the women's equivalent in England. So they've got to attract a new market or they've got to win people over. They're not, it's never going to be additive. World Cups might be different because they are once every 4 years and it could be additive. You might watch both World Cups, men's and women's, because they're not at the same time. And on that note, it's interesting, like in cycling, for instance, the one day monuments, the Roubaix, was used to be held over 2 days. Women on the Saturday, men on the Sunday. Flanders, they used to run together. I'm still always wondering, tennis, obviously, the Grand Slams are concurrent, whereas on the circuit, there's very few concurrent tournaments. The women will be in Miami, the men are in Indian Wells, for example, right?
Mm.
I wonder what the best model is. Do you add women's to men's, or do you run them in parallel?
Yeah.
I wonder what's the best way.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that, Sean. I mean, I have no idea about the economics of it. I just would suggest, based on the fact that you don't have the same amount of spectators and potentially television audience, that it's going to be the biggest challenge. But you almost have to do it. And maybe even if you're organizing a Tour de France and you've got the Tour de France Femmes, you've got to make it work, because that's part of being part of the modern world that we have to look after.
Yeah, I would say there are a few. Some of the Masters events they are staged together. So Indian Wells, they do play at the same time.
Yeah, there's a few like that. Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think you are going to have some lost leaders for the time being, but the hope is that you do get enough eyeballs and interest and people's attitudes change over time.
So I mean, like cycling, right?
Yeah, I know I want to watch the women's Tour de France more than I want to watch the men's one.
Yeah, 100%. I'm far more interested in
Yeah,
that, and some of the
absolutely.
monuments as well. Like I'd rather watch because there's more interest jeopardy because of that's just, and that'll change in 5 years. Maybe it'll be different, but it's like tennis was. Like when Nadal, Djokovic, Federer were in tournaments, like you'd watch those tennis tournaments. But there was a period before Federer came on the scene. There was really like a low point in men's tennis. Women's tennis was far more intriguing. So I'm in that population of fans. I just want to watch interesting stories and characters.
Yeah.
I think other people are less like that. They won't watch women's sport.
Quick cycling stuff then. Demi Vollering to dominate this year then?
No,
No.
no, I don't know. But sorry, what I was going to say
Anyway,
on cycling, just before I
I'm
get to
digressing.
before hot takes, um, it's interesting to wonder like how many people are viably employed by women's cycling teams now compared to 10 years ago. That number must be way higher. Like you think about salaried positions. There are now like cycling teams that are offering cyclists $1 million potentially deal. Well, Vollerings is supplemented by Nike, so she's the biggest earner. But it's interesting, like how many up and coming young cyclists now have a viable career path into cycling. That's why the sports have to do it, because they make economic sense that way, you know?
But certainly women's cyclists are not earning what men's
No,
cyclists.
not even
Yeah.
close.
Yeah.
Like tennis is probably the only sport still, eh, Sean?
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's at Grand Slams. Yeah, they'll get the same prize money.
Yeah, and it came up with that battle of the sexes, Sabalenka Kyrgios, should women have the same? And you get all the things like they play 3 sets versus five. I don't buy that argument. The biggest thing is, like, are you bringing in, you will be paid in proportion to what you bring in. That's how it should work, I think. But they're not going to bring in enough until they get propped up. So that's the loss leader. Anyway, it's a financially philosophical argument.
Yeah.
Vollering, no. Who did I think the other day was going to dominate women's cycling?
Demi Vollering always feels like she's right there and thereabouts all the time, and I feel like this might be her year. Although I don't think she's going to beat Pauline Prévost at the Tour de France, but who knows?
Yeah, I don't know.
Sean, what are your cycling predictions? Give us an overall cycling view. You got Tadej, you got Demi.
The men's side's pretty
I'm
easy.
not. I was very fortunate. For a few years, I did go to the Tour de France, but again, we talked about bandwidth earlier. You guys would know more than me. I mean, is it just not just Pogacar wins the Tour again? Is it as simple as that? Probably.
Yeah.
But can you win Roubaix after you fell last year? I think that's going to be the big one with Pogacar. Can he win Roubaix and Tour de France?
And Milan-San Remo.
And Milan-San Remo. Can he
Yeah.
dominate even more than he has before? I mean, yeah. We kind of think that he will, but we don't want him to necessarily because it takes away from
I definitely don't. I want to see new people. I don't even want Van der Poel to win this year.
Yeah.
My hot take this year is Mads Pedersen wins 2 monuments.
Lovely.
Yeah.
I like that idea.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Judge me by June.
Guys, thanks very much for your time. And I think it's been an awesome discussion. I'm sure there are literally hundreds of events and different topics that we could discuss in this podcast. But we're pretty excited about the year ahead. We're excited to bring you all some of the controversies, the stories behind the stories, and certainly with Sean being at the coal face of a lot of these events as well. It's always lovely to have your insight, Sean. So thank you very much for your time. And to Ross Tucker, thank you very much for your time as well.
Yeah, thanks, both. Enjoy Milan, Sean. Maybe we'll get some feedback after from you.
Absolutely, looking forward to it.
Cool.
You have been listening to the Science of Sport podcast.